Countries that display periods of strong economic development are often praised for providing both the proper political and economic environments to allow such growth. However, it is often forgot what negative effects can be had if a country provides an inhibitive environment for growth and how economies can be transformed by a series of bad political regimes and economic policies. Argentina, while still one of the stronger South American economies, is the perfect example of why it is important to carefully choose the economic policies that will rule a nation. Due to differing political regimes and bad economic decisions, Argentina experienced one of the largest economic declines in recorded history, characterized by a currency default at the turn of the 21st century. It possesses definite comparative advantages in agriculture as the country is endowed with a vast amount of fertile land. Between the years of 1860 and 1930, the country itself outgrew both Canada and Australia in terms of population, total income, and per capita income, mostly due to the exploitation of the rich land of the Pampas. By 1913, Argentina was the world's 10th wealthiest nation in GDP per capita. This, however, would see a sharp decline. As you can see here, while many of the countries saw periods of prosperous development, Argentina saw the contrary, and in the span of 70 years, its GDP per capita world ranking fell from number 10 to number 50 due to a changing economic and political environment. We were given the opportunity to interview with Father Arthur Liebscher, the current Santa Clara University History Department Chair and expert on Argentinian history, who throughout this video will help provide fantastic insight regarding the topic.
Risk of oversimplifying, I will say that the issue is this. It was a vastly successful family farm with a population of 3 or 4 or 5 million people. Now we have the same family farm with a population of 45 million people. And that's the basic problem.
By 1930, the economy deteriorated notably due to the continuous political instability characterized by a military junta taking power. This ended 7 decades of civilian constitutional government. As you can see here, almost immediately following the military junta's rise to power, Argentina saw a sharp decline in its GDP per capita when compared to that as a percentage of the United States. Successive governments from the 1930s to the 1970s pursued a strategy of import substitution to achieve industrial self-sufficiency. This drew investment away from agriculture, an industry in which Argentina had competitive advantage.
Of not changing out of an antiquated model of agrarian production, which would be both agriculture, cereal exports, and meat export, beef. In the 1930s and 40s, a more national movement, out of which came Peronismo, after one Domingo Perón, the general, a more nationalist movement emerged to try to correct this. But arguably, the Peronistas and the current government is a branch of Peronismo. They have evolved into many different, they're like a tree that keeps growing, but all the leaves have different colors. They're much more nationalist, much more populist in the sense of using the wealth of the country for the people against the oligarchy that was allied so much with the foreign customers. The problem is that there hasn't been an effective leap into a post-agrarian society. Another way of putting it, the Argentine economist Aldo Ferrer argued that they missed the Industrial Revolution. That's another way.
Looking at this graph, you can see the drastic effects that import substitution had on the economy. In the span of 3 years, agricultural exports fell by over 4 billion. This sharp decline in exports forced the government to end these policies in 1976, which led to growth in government spending, large wage increases, and inefficient production. This led to chronic inflation. Look at the percentage increase in inflation. In the span of 2 years, inflation jumped from 250% to 3,000%. The political and economic crisis reached its ultimate low in 2001 since the country's independence. Towards the end of 2002, the economy had contracted by 20% since 1998. Following these effects over the course of 2 years, output fell by over 15%, the peso lost 3/4 of its value, registered unemployment exceeded 25%, and income poverty reached its peak of 54%. Much of the blame of the economic collapse was placed on the IMF's conduct prior to 2001, saying the IMF had supported the country's fixed exchange rate for too long and was too lenient towards fiscal deficits.
They bought into a situation of world lending at a time when the international banks had lots of money. The money center banks were willing to lend, and Argentina, with a lot of other Latin American countries, bought into this. So you go from the phase of the distribution of the wealth to borrowed wealth, then they couldn't keep up with paying they couldn't pay their debts, and they went through a series of rolling over. Every 6 months they had to roll over these debts. It was a big crisis. The International Monetary Fund was supervising all of this. Through the 1990s, they tried to rectify this with a government that embraced, it was Peronista government, but it actually embraced, embraced capitalism. It's called neoliberalism. Liberalism being free trade capitalism of the 19th century, and in their language. And so neoliberalism, neoliberalismo, is the re-embracing of capitalism as the source. They cut expenditures. National austerity. They went from national austerity into privatization. They even sold the post office.
However, in 2001, social unrest reached its peak as the crisis worsened and millions of civilians protested against the current president and his policies.
In 2001, the Bush administration changed the rules on them. And they basically said, we're not going to roll any. The American government essentially controlled the International Monetary Fund. And the American government said, we're not going to roll over any more of your debts. You've got to pay up right now. And suddenly, this vast debt, well, they had no choice but to default. And the default, it just triggered this huge economic wave that went through the country. They called it the corralito, the corralling in of everything. And people who had full-time jobs lost their full-time jobs. They went down to half-time jobs. And families, maybe a husband and wife, at one time the husband would have had a job and the wife would have raised the kids. Now both of them have two jobs. It's just been a tremendous, there was a tremendous constriction, and also there was no further capital coming in. And so the result is that the Argentine government, for all of its populist rhetoric, is having now to sit down and try to talk to the debtors and try to settle these things. It's amazing how reality settles in.
Fernando de la Rua resigned from office on December 21, 2001 during the continuous riots. Following his resignation, Eduardo Duhalde became Argentina's president in January 2002. The Minister of the Economy, Roberto Lavagna, was then credited for ensuing recovery of the economy by stabilizing prices and exchange rates in a moment when Argentina was in danger of hyperinflation. Growth then resumed in 2002, with Argentina's economy growing by over 6% a year for 7 years. This was achieved largely in part because of the commodity price boom, and also because the government managed to keep the value of the currency low and abandoning import substitution, which in turn boosted industrial exports.
You want to look at where does Argentina have productive capacity? One is, of course, within agriculture. That can still be pushed and developed. Another thing they can do is a tremendous intellectual capital. They're really smart people, and they're plugged into the world, the world in which other countries that are lesser developed nations are not. All of them are. I'm always amazed when I travel in Latin America how tremendously cosmopolitan and educated people are. But the Argentines are really plugged into the world not economics, but the intellectual scene. Argentine physicians, medicine is very good there in many ways. Many Argentine physicians are on the cutting edge of research. And all of those things, the intellectual capital, especially in the world of